Speaking today with Gavin Dew, the BC Conservative candidate in the Kelowna-Mission riding for the upcoming October 19th general provincial election. Gavin, your third shot at provincial politics. There was a by-election back in, I think, 2016, 2017 down in Vancouver, leadership bid for the BC United Party, and now this shot. Why do you think you have a chance this time?
Well, I think this is a really interesting election, and I think that all going to plan, we're going to win, and we're going to form a new government, because I do think that there's a mood of change in the air. When I'm out knocking on doors, every single door that I knock on knows we need change. Even if they're a new Democrat, even if they've voted for the NDP in the past, even if they might still be voting for the NDP, the mood for change is palpable in the air, and that convinces me that we're in a position to be able to make that change and to bring forward some good solutions for the province. So
why the BC Conservatives? Why would they be the best party to make the change?
Well, we've gone through a really interesting year or two in provincial politics where really, what we've always called the Free Enterprise Coalition or the Economic Coalition in this province, the people determined not to let the NDP run the province into the ground, have been reformed under the Conservative banner. It was a very complicated year as BC United fell apart and the Conservative Party of BC rose to fill that space as the centre-right alternative in this province. And that consolidation has happened very, very quickly. Now we're going into an election where the choice is very clear. It's either the NDP or it's common sense change with the Conservatives.
With the polarization that we're seeing with the NDP on one side, Conservatives far on the other side. There are a lot of suggestions that maybe what we need is a minority government this time around to sort of transition to the next generation of politics. I would assume that you don't believe that, but I'm sure you understand that sentiment.
Yeah, I think we're facing a very close election. I think that this election is probably going to come down to a handful of seats. And that's why it's so important that people that want change are focused on voting for the party that can offer change. There was a BC Chamber of Commerce poll that came out a couple of weeks ago that showed the Conservatives ahead by 1 percentage point across the Okanagan. So I think people need to know that we can't take anything for granted. We don't have any margin for error. We need to make sure we're all consolidating around the alternative for change, and that's the Conservatives. If we obviously hope to end up with a majority government that can get the province back on track. But you know what? To form a minority government is entirely a possibility as well. This is a very, very close election.
The party in which you were formerly aligned with, the BC United, produced an opposition paper on a number of the candidates, including some within this riding. It was not too flattering to some. Your comment on that, what you saw, I'm sure you've read it.
I haven't read the whole thing.
Okay.
I've seen a little bit of that. I think what we need to focus on is what's really happening in the province as a whole. I think if you look at what's happening, you look at everything that David Eby has to say, David Eby doesn't have a lot to say about the fact that we've had 0% private sector job growth over the last 5 years. He doesn't have a lot to say about the fact that our healthcare sector is falling apart. He doesn't have a lot to say about the fact that we've got lawlessness, we've got beatings on the street of teenagers, we've got addiction problems, we've got out of control cost of living. He's not talking about any of that. What David Eby wants to talk about is culture war. What he wants to talk about is negativity and opposition research, because the NDP record is terrible. They know this. So what they're going to do over the next number of weeks is they're going to try to distract people from talking about what's really at stake in this election, which is the future of this province. And I think what we need to do is just stop focusing on all the negativity, stop focusing on all the personal attacks, and get focused on solutions for the province.
Some of that, though, is I mean, there is some reality to that in the fact that, some of the candidates, and I mean, the party is very young. You've got a lot of people that have never been in government before that are going to be put in cabinet positions. And some of the positions that they have that may be considered extreme, radical, controversial or whatever, will be put in those positions. Some people are scared about that, and rightly so.
There's no question that we have been flying an aircraft that's been being assembled and planned all at the same time. Right? It is. Everybody knows that the Conservative Party of British Columbia has come together very quickly and has gone from 3 or 5% in the polls up to being within reach of forming government. And there's a lot of growth and maturation and and so on that happens. It's like growing a startup company from scratch. So yes, we've absolutely gone through that period of growth as a party. When I got pulled in, when I became a candidate, which was about 2 weeks before BC United pulled the plug, you know, one of the reasons why they had asked me to join and one of the reasons why I chose to do so was the belief that we needed to put up scaffolding around the, you know, the new home of free enterprise and make sure that we're getting people pulled into the party and wrapped around the party that have a really strong understanding of business and the economy and policy to make sure that we are equipped to be a government that's ready to lead the province.
You mentioned housing. Let's go there. It's a big problem in this province. It's getting better, but it still needs some work. John Rustad has mentioned scrapping the housing plan that the NDP have put in, potentially losing 300,000 new homes. How do you see housing? That problem?
Absolutely. I mean, the challenges of housing and affordability are a really big set of challenges. Right? It's not, obviously, the actual construction of housing is a key issue, but it's also a function of affordability. We have relatively stagnant wages. We have a lackluster economy in the province. We've had 32 tax hikes over the last 7 years. We have a $9 billion deficit. So the very people that are trying to afford housing are also being squeezed by a weak economy. They're being squeezed by high taxes. They're getting squeezed by all these other costs. And that's a big part of it because housing affordability is a function of the price of housing and the wages available with which to purchase housing. So we've got to address the entire picture. When it comes to housing itself, what the NDP has done is they've been changing policy every 3 or 6 months and just continuing to shake things up, which makes it very difficult as municipalities struggle to onboard the policies that have been imposed from on high by the province. And in some cases, you have small planning staffs in small to mid-sized municipalities that are literally being prevented from processing housing because they're busy processing NDP housing legislation. You have mayors that have been screaming at the top of their lungs that they're being asked to build more housing, but there hasn't been any funding for infrastructure, or there hasn't been a sufficient commitment around provincial funding for infrastructure. That's why we've committed $1 billion a year to supporting municipal infrastructure to make sure we can actually get that housing built and have it actually have infrastructure.
Healthcare.
Our healthcare system is in absolute crisis, right? Just the other weekend, a group of doctors from KGH put out a press release, which was published in Castanet, where they were calling attention to the fact that there were going to be pediatric emergency service interruptions. Doctors were blowing the whistle because they'd gone to the top levels of the hospital and the health authority, and that information wasn't getting out. We've had emergency room closures all over the province. We have a disastrous situation in our healthcare, which people are feeling, whether it's as patients or as people working in the healthcare sector. I've been knocking on doors all over the riding of Kelowna-Mission, which includes KGH. And the number of people that I've talked to who are doctors, nurses, healthcare administrators, service workers in the hospital, the level of frustration that they have around the way that healthcare is being brutally mismanaged in this province is absolutely catastrophic. They are burnt out. Many of them are considering leaving working in healthcare or leaving working in British Columbia, and that is only going to erode the capacity of our system further. So we desperately need change on healthcare.
How do we do that?
We've put out a detailed plan around healthcare. It's called Patients First. At the center of it is a shift away from block funding toward activity-based funding that would help to create more incentives towards service delivery within the system. We've talked about better supporting healthcare workers. We've talked about training and credentials. We've talked about trying to address some of the issues around credential recognition, the bottlenecks in terms of residency spaces that are preventing doctors from being able to practice in British Columbia, and a whole range of other areas that would help us to get healthcare back on track. It's one of the most detailed pieces of policy we've put out. We put it out months ago, and it's been very well received.
As we wrap this up, Gavin Dew, I want to give you a chance to speak directly to the constituents of Kelowna-Mission and tell them why on October 19th they should put a check or an X beside your name in the ballot box.
Yeah, well, first, I'm very thankful to anyone who's engaging and paying attention in this election. It's inspiring to see people checking into politics for the first time. You know, I've met a lot of first-time voters, whether they were 20 years old or 50 years old, and it is really exciting to see people getting galvanized around common sense change. I'm asking for folks' support because I think it is time for change in our province. I think it is time that we have strong representation here that's going to stand up for Kelowna. And I'm putting myself forward because I believe that I've got the experience in business, the experience dealing with public policy, getting things done in and around government to be able to deliver results for Kelowna and to be able to help deliver common sense change for the province of British Columbia.
Gavin Dew, the BC Conservative candidate, Kelowna-Mission, October 19th. Good luck, Gavin.
Thank you so much for having me.